You swore sinew and soul to serve God and the Order of the Templar. For years you built a life upon faith, only to smite it asunder with one sinful blow. And is that not the greatest folly of all, to lose faith when it's all you have left? You were once the chosen of God, a Templar. You are now the chosen of Rayclast, an exile.
So, today we have a little bit of Path of Exile video for you guys. And this is more going to be an overview of my playthrough of the new League. I chose Templar, and later on, you know what, I'm not going to spoil that detail.
Looks like you found something you can defend yourself with. Good. This place is crawling with criminals. There's smoke rising just east of here. Could be worth checking.
Essentially, might as well talk about my current thoughts of Path of Exile 2 being in a separate game engine. And my thought on that is, it's fine. Once they get Path of Exile 2 up and running, then they can most likely make an HD remaster of Path of Exile 1 in the Path of Exile 2 engine, thus fulfilling their promise with extra stats. There is that possibility, but it's not confirmed to my knowledge. But essentially, the basics of Path of Exile, if you haven't played it yet, is many people call it a Diablo clone. And by far, from the sounds of it, it's one of the best Diablo clones. My opinion, it's also more inviting than other Diablo clones. Partly because those use a weird combination of stat blocks and ability blocks, you know, completely separate. And really, builds in this game are much more player customizable than what I've seen from other games so far. And the thing is, something you'll notice is this is not live game commentary, which I usually reserve for blind playthroughs. And, you know, my schedule's a little chaotic, so I have to do what I want when I can. And the thing is, I don't like pulling out big games like Dead Island on a weekday. So I've been... that and some other stuff happened where I could only play games I have deemed not good for live game commentary. Now the thing is, I have never played a hardcore character in this game because there are a few problems, in my opinion. being someone who's been playing this game for almost a decade now. Off and on, not straight. Solid game, don't get me wrong, but there's holes in it. So, for our first passive, we took the damage and minion damage node. And we're going to take that wheel and then go down. Oh, wait. Nope, part of that's me just reading what it is. But essentially, the main goal is to get to that big minion damage wheel where minion damage and increases and decreases to minion damage also apply to you. So one of the main problems I want to get into with the game currently, in my opinion, there isn't enough character delineation from each other. You know, we get random lines here and there after key events for each one, but I mean in active gameplay. You know, making the characters a little more vocal and giving them their own unique characteristics with those vocals would actually bring the characters more to life, in my opinion. But the other problem with my opinion of the characters all of them play their own different way when you level up, but there's just some abilities that kind of feel like you should have them earlier than later. For example, Dominating Blow. And some other build-centric skill gems. Now, for those of you who haven't played Path of Exile before, each gem and each skill gem contains an ability you can use within the game, and you can also manipulate its values based off the tags it has. So, for example, Glacial Slam, or whatever you get at first level of Templar off the beach, is Ice Melee Strike. Glacial Strike, that's the name of it. So anything that has those tags should help Glacial Slam. Oh wait, no, Strike. Essentially, how it works is it converts a percentile of your physical damage to cold damage and has a chance to freeze or chill enemies. But I'm not doing that build for leveling. I'm just going to take the coward's way out, in my opinion. And that's Purifying Flame with some minion supports. Because something I do not see people talk about enough is the fact that Purifying Flame has two main effects. It grants life regen within the ground that it produces, and critical strike chance. Oh, and enemies within it take dot at the same rate of healing. So essentially, basic idea of this sort of startup build is you use a minion, a non-duration minion, and you can use Purifying Flame to heal zombies. Now, if you ask me, any necromancy skill doesn't really mesh well with Templar. Mostly for roleplay reasons. But who am I to say, considering Baldur's Gate allows clerics to also learn Raise Dead. Now, this little map boss here, or area boss, I hate it, because it's one of the first ones that attempts to use cinematic attacks and the like. Alright, with the magic of post, we're right. Nope, never mind. Alright, we're back into it. But the main reason why I hate this boss, it attempts to use cinematic Path of Exile is sort of this identity crisis with boss fights. Some of them feel like very cinematic bullet hell type experiences, which are completely out of place compared to the rest of the game. Now that boss there, it also does burning ground, a lot of burning. And if you play hardcore, it's heavily recommended to have at least 50 fire res before you enter this area. Because of how deadly that one boss is. Now there is, this game also says skill is a huge factor within its gameplay, but Purifying Flame really isn't a DPS skill, it's more of a support skill. As in, use it to support another entity. giving it critical strike chance and regen. And actually, I'm pretty surprised no one uses it in minion crit builds. Now, this boss is actually pretty fine considering it's optional. But, as you can see, for some reason, he is much easier to deal with than the previous boss. I know, zone boss. You know, there's many bosses, there's zone bosses, and act bosses. Essentially, each zone, as in little map, has its own little boss or unique monster. And rarer, sometimes you can find what's known as a rogue exile, who lore-wise is an exile who became rabid. And alright. This is one of those RPGs where there's a lot of inventory management that's cut out. And this is the first instance of this league's league gimmick. Essentially, each league or season of Path of Exile has its own little gimmick. Or thing to spice it up. This league, we have the Twilight Forest, if memory serves correct. Essentially, it's a corrupted underground, dark, corrupted woods, which I'm still not sure how it fits into the overall lore. If enough people like it, they keep it into the game, and it is one of the core components, and very rarely, in the cases of this one, it's a permanent one out the gate because they literally killed an old-time favorite amongst a few who hated it. And they just got tired of making it better because really the core concept of it couldn't get better. Oh, and they revamped the labyrinth, but we're not there yet. So
My mana is spent.
music's pretty good in Path of Exile, but I always found it lacking in later acts. In my opinion, there's also a lack of character theme diversity within Path of Exile, and what I mean by that is pretty much everything is the same throughout all the characters aside from the characters themselves. No matter what, the story is this. Deal with it. But if they just add some like character quips within to this main story, or a bit more of the opening of the character's perspective, could really add a little more to the storytelling of character progression. So, it does take a while for Templar to actually get raised zombies. Mostly because you can't get it for as a quest reward. You have to buy it with a currency item. So, pretty much it's let's see how long it takes to get this currency orb. And you might as well just play the game until that currency orb drops. Or you make one. So, essentially, what I mean by a lack of character gameplay diversity is when you get the ascendancies, I feel like if they added like secret themed phrases depending on the characters and whatever the player chooses as the character's ascendancy. For example, the witch will refer to the elements instead of the undead in some of her lines. Oh, it looks like I finally got the zombies. It also looks like I put phantasms on them. Essentially the basics of Purity of Flame or Purifying Flame is use it to heal the zombies when they get low. So, Fetid Pool really has a nice atmosphere to it, but you know, despite it being a giant donut, sometimes it's a bit of a pain in the ass to find the last dude or last pack of enemies. Because of some of the map choices. For example, the mini-map there has a distinguishing blue line to indicate where the level you haven't been is and the level you've seen. You know, it's pretty easy to see. But in a, you know, with the dark lighting, half the time I find myself just pulling out the mini-map instead of looking at how gorgeous this game is, because Path of Exile also has what many people call screen clutter. You know, with certain builds, there's just so much on the screen that you can't see anything that's about to kill you and whatever. Which, a game that's supposed to be dynamic, supposed to have dynamic features in it, really doesn't bode well. If the boss is doing all this crazy shit, and you're doing all this crazy shit, how are you going to be able to see the crazy shit that's going to kill you? Alright, I cut the other half the fetid pools out. Oh, it looks like I'm looking for the last dude. There he is. It's always the last dude hiding behind a tree stump in an awkward angle. So, enemy design in this game. There's a lot of reskins of mobs, but it's mostly because you're mostly trailing in places, but they level everything up to match the zone. So, for the mud flats, you need to collect these keystones to unlock the door. Probably my least favorite thing about this game is practically every side quest is a fetch quest, or a go here and kill this. I try the woods again. Essentially, the main idea is you need to collect all the confetti, and depending on what types of confetti you find, it determines what random map zone modifiers it's going to add to the zone you're in. Each making enemies harder in their own respect, either by making them more tanky or more dangerous. Also, there's a lot of chaos damage in the woods, especially early on. So I wouldn't recommend touching it early game, which is a very common problem with a lot of the leagues. Right out of the gate, you're just better off waiting until you're not level 30 when you find it, because they have a hard time scaling it down for lower levels.
My mana is spent.
Because it needs to be really big in the higher levels. And if you die in there, you lose everything. I know the confetti you collected does nothing. But essentially it's just an infinite maze where you follow the confetti and collect as much of it as you can before the invisible timer runs out. and you get put back in the main game, and then magic happens. Also, for some unknown reason, they decided to add 3 pseudo-ascendancies, which you can only have one of these pseudo-ascendancies active at a time, and all of them are based around making the player, more optimized things for the players. And I actually pretty much like it, there are some catches. For example, tinctures can only be used if you have the tinctures lady chosen as your main priest. And a lot of her gimmicks are around tinctures. You can find tinctures, but you can't use them if you're anyone else. And tinctures are like this weird new type of flask that enhances flasks or adds to your weapon damage somehow, depending on what points you have in her tree. And probably go best with a flask build or a build that uses shitloads of utility flasks. The other one is more player utility and UI update. Includes a backpack to carry more stuffs, and the ability for any work Y, granting you the ability to scream at the dead and boxes to drop more loot by yelling at them. But there's a certain amount of times you can use it in each zone or map. And the last one has a new corpse devouring gimmick. By eating a corpse, you can gain immunities, resistances, and attacks. But each one does a lot more, so I heavily recommend looking up the pseudo-ascendancy trees if you're interested. Yep. Alright, I decided to cut most of that out. The caves don't really process well on YouTube. That and the Granddaddy Crab is an optional quest, and I did it, but I cut it for time. Keep in mind the footage is about 4 hours long. I need to cut a lot of this out. Most of it's literally just UI stuff in between playing. But it's also good to cut out extraneous gameplay. Especially when it's tedious or the same thing. Now, Path of Exile, in my opinion, really isn't a good game to watch by itself or someone play it. It's one of those games that feels a whole lot better when played, because there's a lot of player choice in how you play. That's a main derivative factor in how the game plays and looks. As well as RNG, practically making each playthrough its own unique experience. I said practically, not actually. Alright. So, what happens here after this cut is that I spent so long managing the inventory that the zone reset, and for those new players, certain zones have a random chance to be inverted. Ledge is probably the best example as shown here. When you load from the waypoint, which is about 1/2 to 3/4 from the entrance of the cave, that's also slightly randomly generated. Considering the previous instance had going up as the progression, and it was a perfect change in my opinion. That's why it was a little confusing, but essentially I end up accidentally going all the way back to the beginning of the zone, so I'm just going to cut where I rectified that. But you can always tell when the zone, I know what direction you're supposed to go to progress, because there are 3 stones pointing in the direction to progress. But it's done so in a very subtle way.
The earth of Rayclast rejects the dead. The black spirit of storm and dream now reaches into the ground and raises up the slain.
Also, there are lore shrines you can pick up and listen to. I've listened to all the voice-acted ones numerous times, and it's something that I feel like they need to do for the other half of the game. My opinion, they have to voice act all the lore shrines and bottles and whatever after Act 3 and 4. I think there's a few in Act 4, but definitely in the revisiting of Act 1 there definitely needs to be more voice-acted war nodes like that. You know, to sort of complete the full picture of there being voice-acted war nodes. But there's a handful of war nodes for new players. Also, the zone boss for this area is Kenduku, the false god. He's pretty easy to handle and deal with. He's one of those bosses you can practically stand in one area and not get touched by any of his abilities. It also depends if you kill him fast enough. Also, the Templar is a little slow in Act 1. He's probably the second slowest character out the gate, with the slowest being Marauder and the fastest being Ranger. But, yeah, the Goatmen. I actually kind of like how they did the Goatmen in Path of Exile as enemy design. Now, I haven't been talking about a lot of the enemies, mostly because they're either too generic or milquetoast. For example, the crabs. There is a very unique species of crabs in Path of Exile, though. The ones that shoot bullets at the player. And there's also a lot of undead things, too. Skeletons, for example. And each base type has its own unique thing. Oh, I also forgot to comment on the Roas from the Mudflats. They're also a unique animal in Path of Exile. And they're probably what you would call the mascot of Act 1, in my opinion. So, oh, and the Willy Boys are also somewhat of a unique enemy. And this is this area's wild boss. He is technically optional, but he's also one of the bosses that kills the most players unexpectedly. Alright. The prison block, in my opinion, is the start of the next sub-act in Act 1. Or the thematics, shift into the more dark and magical and paranormal influences of Path of Exile. But before we do that, this is one of the only zones in the game with technically 2 separate mini-boss unique mobs. And this guy was originally put into the game for Prophecy as a story for the Prophecy storyline, which got removed. Originally, you would find the main character of Prophecy lead here in a cage, and then that guy would ambush you. Once he's dead, you can free her and do prophecies. Prophecy sucked. No one used it. I mean, more and more people stopped using it. And then they just decided to tear it out of the game. Essentially, the main idea of Prophecy was you could spend tokens to get random things that would pop in the background called prophecies. But yeah, like I was saying earlier, this is where I consider the second sub-act of Act 1 to start. It's where the themes shift. Where it goes more into this grim, dark fantasy essentially, the lore of Path of Exile is, there's this corruption here in Rayclass that makes it pretty much unlivable to the point of inexorability. No matter what you do, no matter what you try, at the end of the day, you're doomed to become one with the corruption or be one of the many fools who get crushed under heel by it. And for some reason, randomly, you get these rare gold-type mobs that just have modifiers that make them more powerful than any unique mob in the entire game. I have no fucking idea how that's even possible. But if you ask me, they need to figure out a way to make unique bosses challenging and difficult without turning them into fucking bullet hells or unfair tedious or dynamic boss fights. Path of Exile, in my opinion, really does not benefit well from the dynamic boss fight boss build. And also, it does not benefit well from ultra hard bosses, for lack of a better word. You know, there's some bosses that are just meat tanks. And then there's bosses that are devastating. And it's a hard balance, I know. Thematically, some of these bosses deserve the difficulty they have. But you're going to tell me that a unique witch that is in the first zone of the game at the recommended level of play can one-shot you and can kill you 2 or 3 times before you kill it. When your lately bosses, random unique monsters like that die in 2 or 3 seconds and barely do any damage, when a rare mob out of the middle of nowhere. Sorry about that. The little boy was getting very vocal there for a moment. But yeah, random rare bosses out of the middle of nowhere that take forever to kill and not do any damage. And I've actually managed to capture quite a few of those, not just in Act 1. But like I was saying there,
belief is the strongest metal of them all.
scattered, for those who are new to the game, throughout the game, there are trials that are scattered about, which upon completion will grant you one of the keystones needed to partake in the labyrinth. And they completely redone the reward system of the labyrinth. Alright. Now we cut to a bit closer to the boss. final boss of the prison, who is the first mandatory boss to kill. This part of the prison is eerie.
Your answer's here, heretic. In Ray class.
Because it's one of the first areas that's actually void of monsters. And with some of the changes they've done to Brutus since the beginning of the game, they really nailed it this last time. Instead of him being locked in his own arena, he has the entire empty space to his advantage. Also, if you ask me, Brutus was never really a pit fighter, but he is he's ruthless. You know, as what a pit fighter would be in any other circumstance, but in Path of Exile, pit fighters are more regal than a bloodthirsty killing machine. Which Brutus is more of an animal than an honorable adversary. It's okay, baby. Alright, I decided to jump after all the inventory management and the like. Now we're in the climb, which is... Wait, no, not the climb. Well, gameplay-wise, you're supposed to follow this trail to a gate with a bitch who closes it and locks the door on you and tells you have to go around. Now the only way around is the other half of Act 1.
The path to the truth is
Yep. So now we move on down this way. Looking for the next zone. Sometimes it's on the left, sometimes it's on the right. Flip a coin, pick a direction. Eventually you'll get there. And this is the first essences on camera. Essentially, you'll find these monsters locked away inside of a crystal, and they have essence. They have an ability granted to them by a essence, and you can pick up that currency and put it on a white item to get a white item with one guaranteed mod. I mean, a rare item with one guaranteed roll. So, for example, you can find an essence that gives life on armor, flat life on armor, but it does something different for other items. But this is the first zone you see Hell Lions. A little bit of lore. They actually redesigned Hell Lions once thus far. Originally, they looked more like flaming wolves, but they are still called lions. But now they've been redesigned as more of a hellish hyena, crossed with one of those dog statues from Asia. Which brings me to my least favorite type of enemy. It's the enemy with on-death effects. And the main reason why I don't like them, it makes sense for swarms of enemies, and that's fine. It's just when you have the random, unique, or rare mob with an on-death effect that can completely one-shot you as a means of revenge after you killing it. Very distasteful. You know, I flawlessly killed this thing, and now it just nukes the entire screen, and I'm dead. But the Hell Lion gives burning ground upon death. And if you stand it, you're on fire. Simple. And that brings us to the next area, Ship Graveyard. Sometimes you have to make sure they're dead. Some enemies by the door, because occasionally there is a bug where you're still loaded in the zone you're loading when you load into the next.
This is a mortuary for lost children.
It's a bit of an old bug. It caused the game to crash. But now I have an SSD, and loading times are practically nothing. So this ship graveyard is one of the strongest thematic areas in Act 1. So far everything's been bland or copy and paste. Very generic places and locales.
Frankly, I would have been surprised. Stuck.
An ancient prison is pretty much has been done a lot. there are very few ship graveyards, and so much so that pretty much any way you take it, probably be a unique idea. The main enemy in this area is ghost pirates and sea witches. Now the thing is, with the lore, all the sea witches in Act 1 are actually Merveil's daughters. Or lesser daughters of Merveil that have migrated. And since we're pretty close to Merveil's lair, where the main reason why this is a ship graveyard is because the sea witches are essentially sirens in this game's universe. So they would sing to the sailors to lure them in. And then eat and cannibalize them. And that's why they're ghosts. But did he think pirates starve to death here? No, this is Rayclast. There are fates far worse than starving to death. Being dragged out of a boat by your dick is one of them. But, yeah. So, we help Fair Graves, and, technically, he's one of the only characters you get to kill actually canonically in the story more than once. But yeah, the first Fairgraves quest is alright. It is out of the way, but unlike the later Fairgraves quest, it's also on the way. And also there are certain enemies within the tables of each zone. Sometimes you can have a map with this enemy instead of that enemy to vary it up. And one of the monsters in the rotation is tar zombies. But we have a reskin version of the Roa again. Also, they are one of the first enemies in the game that has high chance to stun. Oh, that's a super unique. I mean, a super rare. And it's also massive in view. Occasionally you'll find these shrines strewn all over the place. Usually on average 1 per zone. Unless you're in maps, then it's probably 2 or 3 depending on whatever. But essentially they enhance nearby mobs. You can either steal the shrine before you kill the mobs, or kill the mobs, then take the shrine. It's heavily recommended you steal the shrine if you can before you kill the mobs, because they usually do buff the mobs, but they buff you if you pick up the shrine. But that said, now we're in the mini zone. Sometimes they'll find mini zones. There's sort of a weird limbo in between. Technically, it's its own zone, but it's too small to be its own standalone zone. That and the only entrance and exit is where you found it. Another good example is the area where you have to go kill the granddaddy crab we skipped earlier. I also guess the fetid pool and Tidal Island also count as a mini zone. But they're still somewhat big enough to be their own zone. But once you find the MacGuffin, you're pretty much done in this area. And you can take it back to Fairgraves. But the other thing to differentiate mini zones is the fact that most of them also don't count as their own separate instance. Sometimes they're attached, and those are technically rooms. Now, this area is a bit maze-like. There is a unique monster you need to kill. But it's pretty easy to kill, unlike some of the others. It's also technically an optional boss. So now we walk back to Fairgraves, which I cut out. Deliver it. He then attempts to kill you. Defeat the Old Flame, which is somewhat of a phylactery type device. But you kill him in body, but his mind and soul are trapped in the phylactery, which has become his ship because the Old Flame is still lit, but it's also bound to the ship. Merveil's Cavern, and it's the final stretch. And she is the final Act 1 boss. And she is one of my least favorite boss fights. For reasons we'll get to soon. It's also a double layered zone, meaning you have to complete 2 zones before you get to the actual boss. But yeah, the zombies and Purifying Flame really help early on. Considering this build is going to take that wheel for increases and decreases to minion damage also apply to you wheel, which is the biggest minion damage wheel in the game. Alright. So... one of the annoying enemies of Act 1 and later acts that's actually a random swap in is, I don't know the name of it. It's the one that comes up to you and flashbangs your character. Also, to save some time, I'm just going to skip to the end of this dungeon. Mostly because it's a sprawling maze that's randomly generated, and even if I show you how to complete it, you won't be able to complete it based off of this map. Same thing with here. Alright. That's a lot of that cut out. Essentially, you want to follow the gold coins until you find Merveil's chambers. And this is the first act boss that's gives you an extreme combination of mechanics. It is a little bit of BS. So she has barrage ice, an ice barrage, which has a high crit chance, and thus high chance to chill and freeze. The closer you are, the more damage it does. It gets less accurate the further you are. And she tends to eat early level minions like popcorn and butter. I think at some point I upgraded to Absolution instead of Purity of Fire. The difference is Absolution, when you kill an enemy with it, it becomes a minion for a bit. And with all of the Radiant themed minions of the game, All of them are duration based, and go fuck yourself if you don't think they should be. Now, the main reason why I dislike Merveil so much is she sporadically gains abilities, like that Ice Rain. And she's actually a reasonable mild bullet hell. Sorry if you hear the boy in the background. But she also has a shitload of health, especially if you're a early minion, leveling as minion. Alright. So, not only does Merveil have tricks up her sleeve, she's also the first boss with energy shield. And the main reason why that's a problem is energy shield, when it comes to bosses, is a buffer that negates them taking damage for X amount of damage. Which it's always based off of a percentile of their maximum health. So, theoretically, if you don't kill her fast enough, she could regenerate 3 times her health pool in damage value. That and her second phase is one hell of a bitch. If you see a spire of white, don't go near it. But she fills the entire room with them. And it's odd, some of them are actually scripted in certain places, when others just get randomly put on top of you. And it's really hard to keep your minions up and or totems in this fight, mostly because she has abilities that can pretty much deny them. The spires there do cold dot. And yes, the longer you're in it, the damage field, the higher chance you take freeze. But it also does a shitload of bleed damage. And her moves are easier to choreograph in this mode, in this stage, but it's really the spires. And this is supposed to be one hell of a dynamic boss fight. But the thing is, if I'm pulling my punches on a boss that's regenerating a hit pool, why am I being punished for being greedy or safe? Literally, you're punished for either in this boss fight. And it's actually pretty hard for early summoners. for a handful of reasons. Mostly early on, you don't have enough resistances or minion damage nullification this early into the game. But the fact that it's the first boss with an energy shield, meaning that in this boss fight is literally all about not getting hit in melee or ranged by filling the screen with damage and aerial deniance for the player. Really sculpt together one hell of a bitch of a boss fight. And it could really be updated, in my opinion. And the main reason why I say that is it pretty much directly counters like 2/3 of builds becoming a massive hurdle for two classes of builds, but every other class, you know, essentially this one denies melee, and I'm going to end it here. See you in Act 2 next episode.